So good morning from me. It could be wherever you are in the world, could be slightly different. And welcome to episode 8 of my second season here with the Real Estate Change interview series, which I hope is helping a few people really change their minds and start to understand a little bit more about the innovation roadmaps of some of the largest companies in our sector, and really provide people with some knowledge and insights in which to inform themselves on their own journey, whether that be to create innovation maps or whether it be to become future leaders. And I'm really pleased today to welcome Richard Pickering, Head of Innovation at Cushman Wakefield for the EMEA region. And Richard, without further ado, I'd love just a little brief introduction about sort of who you are, where you're based, team size, and sort of generic role side of Cushman.
Sure. Well, thanks for inviting me to the discussion today, James. Great to see you and great to be involved. So, yeah, my name's Richard Pickering. I head up innovation for the EMEA region of Cushman and Wakefield. I guess as the title would suggest, that EMEA is the scope of my operations. My team here, I've got a small team who kind of catalyse innovation centrally. I also have portfolio responsibility for our data and analytics offering in the UK, and we've got a team of about 25 people that span UK and Budapest. And then I have a series of sort of resources I work with on a project basis, including close connections with our global business, our technology business, our transformation business. So my job's to try and help evolve our business, help us meet our strategic goals, align what we're doing to the kind of evolving needs of our clients, and become a better, more operationally efficient business in the process. So that's broadly what I do on a day-to-day basis.
Cool. And I mean, I think it's a really fascinating model that Cushman have, and certainly in a lot of the work that I've done researching for this interview, it's really I think very forward-thinking in how you framed it and how you built it, and the time and dedication and resource that are actually being applied into this sort of area. So I think you've got a very envious role to play. So I'm really looking forward to diving into that in a little bit more detail shortly. But just very quickly, a word about the partners that I work with on this series. So my sincere thanks to people like Equiem, who really are there to transform sort of workplaces into world-class destinations, to use their terminology, but I've known their team for years, and they've really helped me build this journey out. And then secondly, as part of my sort of progression as a leader, I'm taking quite a few courses with Oxford University and Sage Business School, and I think a tagline there is really interesting, which is it's the same Oxford education virtually, and they've really supported me in this path of trying to help us understand really about leadership, culture, strategy, and the importance that has, especially around fast-paced and dynamic departments like what Richard has got here today. So sincere thanks to them. And obviously, the company that I set up 4.5 years ago have now since moved to an NED role as their non-exec chairman at Unissu, which really looks at PropTech Procurement. So thanks to all 3 of those partners. So, Richard, what I'd really like to do, if I can, to sort of kickstart this interview off, is primarily to look at innovation at Cushman. You're a significant global organisation with 50,000 plus staff. How on earth have you considered innovation more broadly amongst the organisation?
Yeah, great question to start with. I think
not the easiest either.
An easy one, yeah. Look, I think you've got to consider what is innovation, but that's that sort of more esoteric question in order to get to the answer of what for how it affects our organisation. But as I would see it, I think you can describe it quite simply, in that it's the evolution of the business in order to meet the business's strategic goals. So it's our delta, it's our change, it's how we're going to make ourselves fit for the future. So we've done it under various guises historically. We've had it purely as a technology-driven initiative. We've set up small kind of groups across the different regions. And this sort of latest incarnation, which I'm leading now, is designed as a genuine convergence of the front office business, the technology organisation, our partners within our global technology business, and also our transformational agents, those guys leading on the transformation projects. And I think that's an important triumvirate. I think you've got to get those three things working really well if you want to deliver innovation, because they're all critically reliant on each other. I think you can't look at innovation from a technology lens without knowing what the business strategy and what you're trying to achieve is. Equally, many of our projects within, or many of our innovation initiatives will have a technological component, so we need those guys on board. But at the same point, innovations that are talked about don't become useful unless they're operationalized. And that's where having transformation experts who can embed those innovations within the operations of the business becomes super important. So my job's trying to corral all of that together for the European region and use that to make sure we hit our strategic growth objectives.
So, I mean, speaking rather prosaically and structurally here for a second, you're obviously heading up the innovation in the EMEA region. What does it look like from an executive standpoint? Is there a global lead? Is there sort of continental lead? How is that all made up, and rough size of that outlook?
Yeah, look, so we don't have an innovation organization. We have people within regions who are responsible. We do have a global technology organization. That's one of our global verticals, and that's delivered in a genuinely global manner through leading up to our group CDIO. So that provides a level of consistency in terms of our technology strategy across the globe, and make sure that we're taking advantage of great technology initiatives in one region, exporting them to another to get scalability. And equally, we have a global transformation function under our new global transformation chief transformation officer, who was appointed at the beginning of this year to do that job. And again, that helps to build best practice in how we deliver these. So the missing piece of this, as we saw it, was how do we make sure that the business viewpoint, the voice of the service lines, the needs of the clients, is played through into that execution capability. And that's why my role has been stood up in our EMEA region, and there are some comparable type roles being stood up in our US and APAC businesses.
And so, and this may be unfair on Ross Hodges, who was meant to be joining us today for this discussion, but has got whipped away to the US overnight. How does his role, what is Ross's role, and how does that fit into these sort of several bags that?
Sure. Yeah, look, so Ross is a really important partner of mine in terms of the job that I do, as with others in the technology organisation. So Ross sits within our technology organisation, and if you like, Ross's job is he is our primary interface with PropTech businesses, and he is out there every day, is kind of scouring the market for new opportunities to either partner or invest in PropTech businesses. And so he brings that kind of supply side lens to what we're doing. And then I'm providing more of the demand lens of what do we need to support the business strategy, and hopefully somewhere in the nexus of those two, we come up with both what we need to deliver and what the solutions are that will enable us to deliver that. So yeah, Ross is a super important partner of mine in that respect, and and very much externally facing. He is facing into the PropTech markets rather than being someone who manages our enterprise systems and so on. So that's how we kind of, I think it's really important to me. I know I've got a very clear sense of what the business and our clients want to achieve, but sometimes you don't know everything that's going on in the on the supplier market, and those give you new ideas that then reiterate back into business strategy. So that touch point is super important to me.
It's like a positive feedback loop in that sense, isn't it? I mean,
right.
It's constantly refreshing. And I suppose just for context, for those of you who are not aware, Cushman, from that, and I don't know if you sit this in innovation, technology, or transformation, but have also made investments in Fifth Wall and Metaprop, and I find it quite interesting, some of the initiatives that we might touch on a bit later on, Richard, but obviously you've had partnerships with Plug and Play and Stanford University, and then 1871, which I have to say, I wasn't aware what 1871 was, and I wasn't able to look into it, but are you aware of 1861?
I wasn't involved in that personally, actually, no.
Do you know what it is?
I'd have to dust off my notes. Yeah.
Look, we have to look at it ourselves and reflect back. But for me, there is that mentality of it's not just stick money into an investment fund or have a partnership on an accelerator scheme, plug and play. But there's obviously thought and cohesiveness that have sort of knitted everything together in there. So I really like reading about that earlier on. So what I think, what I often find is a really nice aspect in these interviews when I'm talking about sort of heads of innovation is that human story behind these roles, because I often find as this industry is maturing, you've got more people who are being appointed into particular roles like innovation roles. But I think traditionally we're still finding a lot of organisations recruiting from within, and we often call them the anointed people who've sort of gone through the ranks. I mean, you've been at Cushman for years, so with respect. So I'd love to know a little bit more about your journey from start to where you are now, just for people's understanding.
Yeah, sure. Well, look, I started life as a lawyer, a commercial property lawyer, a long time ago, and that felt like a good idea at the time. And I'll leave that to people who have a clearer focus on that now than I was prepared to give. So I quickly decided that I preferred work on the other side of the table, on the kind of agency and consultancy side, and cross-qualified, moved back into real estate, qualified as a chartered surveyor, did a bit of brokerage, spent most of my early career doing development advisory and regeneration and strategy projects. I think because I had that kind of technical mindset, I got increasingly asked to do internal strategy projects. And then over time, the balance of those internal strategy projects increased and my kind of outward face sort of started to balance down a little bit. I ran our research team here for a bit and kind of gave that a different focus. I went back to business school, did an MBA. I set up a program called our Futures program at Cushman's, which is about kind of exploring how the industry might change over a longer horizon. We do quite a bit of thought leadership under that banner. I then held the role of Chief Strategy Officer for the UK business of Cushman's, and that's really where I would say my skill set is in strategy. And then about 5 or 6 months ago, I was asked to take this new role, which is Head of Innovation for the EMEA region. I think if I was being unkind to myself, I'd probably say that that transition from strategy to innovation is someone telling you implicitly stop talking about stuff and get on with doing it. Maybe on the more optimistic side, it would be that people thought that some of the strategies that were being developed in the previous role were going to be important to the region, and therefore they saw the ability to kind of step that role up a bit. But I still get very much involved in our Futures program. I think you can't be a good strategist or innovator unless you've got a view on where the future's going, and that's really important to me that stays a core part of my role, and indeed interfacing with clients on their views on the future of real estate is really important to that too. So yeah, I've been in this role for 5 months now. Lots to do. 10 years worth of work ahead of me, I can see already, but really exciting to be in this role at this point in the journey of the company. I think there's some really exciting stuff ahead of us. Yeah,
I would agree. I mean, I think digital transformation journeys are not quick. They take an awful lot of time, and I'm very envious of the people who are at the coalface now with a little bit of knowledge. I mean, they may not be experts in transformation projects, they may not be experts in property, actually, for that matter, but that combination over that next, as you say, decade to 2 decades is going to be a really particularly fascinating one, and it'll be interesting to sort of pick winners and losers. But I think to use a sort of a phrase that I think you mentioned earlier on, if you just going to sit there and not really do anything, you're guaranteed to fail. It's the people that are able to start testing things and learning and evolving, learning from those failures, which will do very, very well. So I'm sure that mixture of sort of futurism and strategy is going to see you very, very good over time. So I'm just going to go through a couple of relatively quick structured questions, which hopefully will be quite straightforward. So, I suppose, in a sentence or two, what does culture really mean to you? Your work.
You're asking all the easy questions today, then, James. So, culture, right?
This is the easy one because I'm going to try not to interrupt. So what does it mean?
Yeah, look, great. I mean, good question. I mean, I would see it as it's the sort of the glue that binds an organisation. It's the common factor. And you could maybe look at it as maybe habits or patterns of behaviour that define the organisation, and I guess importantly make it different to its peer group. I think particularly in founder-owned businesses, you can certainly influence culture top down.
Yeah.
I think for culture to be genuine, it needs to be espoused from bottom up, and people need to feel a sense of common identity. It relates to them. I can understand this culture, and I think if you can get to that level, most companies do have it in some degree, then it starts to come across in the the language and the artifacts of the business. You kind of hear and different people speak to each other in a common way. They frame risk in a common way. They treat each other in a way that is different. And certainly, I say I've been here for a long time. We've been through a couple of big mergers in that period. And I can see different cultural elements, and certainly when new people join the business, they tell us that they can identify Cushman's culture as being different from maybe where they've come from, and usually in a good way. So that's really helpful for us to hear. I think culture done wrong can be a really bad thing, right? I think culture is not necessarily a good thing. Culture can be really divisive if it's not in the right place, and it can be relative to what we're talking about. It can be a huge barrier to innovation if you get it wrong. And I think the other thing is unlike business process and technology, you can't change culture very quickly. It's got a high inertia. So it's probably, I think I like the fact you've asked that question first, because it probably underpins everything else, if I'm honest.
Yeah, and I mean, in a study that we did earlier this year, one of the recommendations that we've actually put together for the industry to take on is that you have to make culture the number one priority as you go through a digital transformation shift. Because if you don't bring people along on that journey and instigate your values correctly and have that strong leadership built around culture, it's never going to go anywhere. So I would agree wholeheartedly with statements made. But I think with that in mind, and when we talk about the strength of your sort of culture and the beliefs around that, I'm interested, therefore, in your thoughts around digital transformation and really what that means for you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you were to go to a dictionary or something like that, right? I think you'd find sort of common, I guess, truth to this. I guess, as I see it, very basically, it's the migration of analog business processes into digital ones. That's probably the most basic form of it. Beyond that, more aspirationally, it's also the opportunity to access new business models that maybe your organisation doesn't currently run. That's more than an operational play. That's your value proposition, how you run your business. I mean, it also certainly has an operational focus. It's the opportunity to do things better, faster, in some cases more cost effectively. I think one of the things that is really important to digital innovation, and I think not everybody gets this straight away, is the center of any digital transformation is data. Without data, you're not going to do digital transformation. And when I say that, I mean things like governance, taxonomy, integrations. Those things are going to be critical underpinners to how you whether you succeed or not in digital innovation. And I think it's because there's a sort of microeconomic truth to this. And if you look at an organisation like ours, like we're a people business, right? We're a professional services people business. So digital innovation has quite a different, or the output of that has quite a different economic model to traditional professional service delivery. So traditional professional service delivery, you have quite low capital costs and you have quite high incremental unit costs of delivery. Whereas when you're doing digital innovation, you have usually some level of fairly fixed or high capital investment that you require to get things going. And the benefit of that is then you see a a reduced unit cost of delivery or greater operational leverage. But what that means is you've got to create scalability within your innovation design, and that's where data becomes, common data understanding of what that means becomes a critical underpinner to your ability to deliver that. So I think that's my perspective on digital transformation. I don't know if you agree, James, or not.
Yeah, I do, and I think that was a very grown-up answer. With the greatest respect, because I think it was very sensible, and I'm a great supporter of the theory that David Rogers put together in his book on digital transformation. I think it's called the Digital Transformation Playbook, where he breaks down the process into 5 core areas, and he talks about customer, competition, innovation, values as being 4 of them. But he absolutely is in agreement with you that data is at the forefront, and you've got to understand, what you're collecting, how you're collecting it, how you're structuring it, how you're understanding it, and it's absolutely the right thing to do. So, and I think just for those of you who are watching this particular edit, it's well worth now going back to the edit around innovation at Cushman Wakefield and seeing Richard's thoughts and understanding around having digital transformation team as well, which would now be interesting to sort of put that into context. So I think there's another angle to all of this. I mean, we've talked a little bit about culture, we've talked about transformation. I'm now interested to really bring that back to your own personal perspectives on leadership. Given the team that you're now leading, relatively new, 5 months into that particular role at Cushman, what does leadership mean to you when you're managing that sort of people?
Yeah, look, I've been fortunate to have had some great leaders lead me in the past, and I guess as everybody does, you try and learn from them what works and what works less well, and then try and adopt it aspiration in your own behaviours. I think I'd maybe unpack that into the kind of the attributes or actions of a leader to define leadership, and I think it's got to start with setting a clear vision about where you're trying to get to. And I think most good leaders I've seen have the ability to project themselves into a future and understand what that future looks like, and then take the lessons from that future back into actions that you set today. So I think that's the first thing I would say that a good leader needs to have. I'd say the second thing is being able to narrate that vision of the future in a compelling way. And I think, again, I look at most good leaders, and they're mostly good storytellers. They're people who can work on explaining why people should follow them on a journey, not just bark orders at people and tell them to do something without explaining it. So I think that's probably another point. Following through on what you said you were going to do is pretty important. Business is pretty difficult, and you need to be willing to stay the course and have conviction. Particularly strategy, digital transformation. These aren't things that you do in 6 months. They're long-term activities, so you need to be willing to stay the course. I get told by people, my stakeholders, that one of the most important things to them is open communication. Particularly in a big people business like ours, that's really important. And I think that includes telling them bad news when there's bad news to be told, being open about that and being willing to pivot if needed. And look, maybe above all, I think a good leader, you need to act ethically, and you should treat other people in the way that you would hope to be treated yourself, or maybe yourself at an earlier point of your career. And that's really important to me personally. It makes me sleep well at night knowing I've acted ethically and in a way that other people would hopefully want me to do.
Yeah, and it's sometimes it's almost a subconscious approach, isn't it? Because it's about your character, but raising that level of ethical persuasion to the forefront is an important area for you. But just going back a step there, when you talk about, it's important to have a clear vision, narrate the vision, and you become a storyteller. It's really fascinating. For me, I'm trying to raise that level of consciousness around my own leadership, and that's exactly what I've just recently learned, working, I mentioned earlier on with Oxford. And they often talk about the different styles of leadership, and it's very, very clear that we are seriously lacking in our industry what they term as a symbolic leader, where if you're good at it, you're known as a poet and a storyteller. And I think you're absolutely right. And for those of you who are interested, definitely have a look at what Cushman are doing with Future Labs. There's some really interesting work that they're doing there, and obviously the work that you do with your newsletter, Richard, which I'm a big advocate of, to have that narration and thoughts and feelings around that. So definitely keep a look out for that. So bearing in mind we've talked about leadership, I think one of the things I'd really like to touch on is that sort of area of frustration around leadership and leaders and all of that sort of stuff. So what's the tip that you would give a future leader based on your own experiences so far?
Yeah, I'd probably say be willing to listen and be open to new perspectives. I think no matter how senior you are, in fact, probably particularly if you're senior and have a lot of experience, I think that experience can sometimes lull you into a false sense of safety about your decisions. And I think we're moving into an environment where some of the new rules of doing business are just completely different from the ones of the past. And having that experience is sometimes really helpful, but it's also some baggage because it creates an anchoring bias towards the way that things have been done historically. And I think in some cases, not every case, but in some cases, it certainly helps to have more of a zero-based mindset, or a blank sheet of page, open perspective on how things might emerge. So I think go in with a plan. I think having a plan's incredibly important, but don't be humble enough to explore perspectives of other people. And sometimes I found those perspectives have come from very unexpected places, people who you don't necessarily expect to have the right idea, whether they're particularly young or junior, or maybe you haven't, maybe someone who's very senior who's had a very different perspective, and maybe seen as not a progressive innovator. But some of those gems of knowledge have been certainly, it's caused me to reflect on a couple of times and think, actually, I should change my plan based on that. And I think being open to those perspectives is important.
I'm going to give you an example, a little story from last week. Actually, I went to a meeting, and it was a very senior consultancy operation, and we were just sort of talking through the day, and he was saying, I said, the frustration I have with PropTech businesses, and in particular at conferences, he said they stand on the stage and they basically advocate that the real estate industry is going fundamentally in a different way, and it's all wrong, and they're talking to people in the audience who are multimillionaires of the property industry. What do they know? And I sat there and I let them talk for a while, and I just said, look, I'm really sorry. I'm going to call him Derek. I'm really sorry, Derek. I've got to go back a step. I said, the person standing on the stage telling these multimillionaires in the audience that their business model is wrong, I kind of take issue with that, because they've become multimillionaires and whatever success means to them, because they understood the property industry previously, and they've built themselves up, and they've just built incredible empires. But actually, it's not really about them, unless, to use your term, they're open to new experiences and they can take on board what these people are talking about. Because actually, what we've got to start thinking about is, what does the industry look in not 5 years' time, but 25 years' time, and say, well, who are the multimillionaires, billionaires, whatever it's going to be, or success metrics going to be in 25 years? Because it's those people in the room that we should be talking to, because what we do know is the industry is not going to stay still. It's going to be in flux, it's going to change, it's going to morph, and there'll be technology changes, there'll be mentality changes, there'll be a whole raft of different things. And those people are not necessarily in the right position or mentality to listen to them. It's the others behind them, which will be the leaders in 25 years, which we need to do. So,
with you, yeah.
Yes, I agree with your tip. Let me remove that now. So, I sort of alluded to this a little bit earlier on, that innovation is a difficult journey that we go on. And I suppose with that in mind, and your role as that head of innovation with EMEA and all the other different things that you do, which are all progressive and forward-thinking and challenging and dealing with change management and things like that, there must be frustrations that you have about process? I'm just intrigued to see what that might look like.
Yeah, I mean, look, I guess it would start by who takes jobs like mine. They're people. Yeah, so that could be a whole another question. But I think they're genuinely people who want to make a change and make a difference, right? They're not people who are advocating for the status quo, right? So inevitably, people like me want to go faster than usually the business is ready to consume the change. So maybe you see the answer very clearly. I can see how it needs to go this way, and you want it to happen straight away. But in real life, it doesn't work like that. You need to balance what's existing and profitable with what's new and exploratory and might be future aligned. Or you need to think about how much management bandwidth we've got to prosecute a change and make trade-offs within your portfolio, or just the willingness of the workforce to absorb that level of change within any defined period. So I guess my personal frustration is I always want things to go faster than they are doing. I want things to happen really quickly.
Yeah.
But I think that's my failing for not taking an enterprise lens on what is being on how the whole business works. And I think the kind of learning I take from that is good innovators need to be quite patient.
Okay, so that's what I was trying to work out. Is your frustration at yourself not being patient enough, or is your frustration with powers that be, the bureaucracy and red tape that you have to fight through in order to push initiatives along? Which one is it?
Well, I mean, inevitably in any big organisation, there's complexity in the design of that organisation, and that does. That's something that's a hurdle you need to jump over. That's true to any business, but I think there's also a sense of just realism in any successful large business. There are things that are working well, and they rightly absorb some of the management and change capacity.
Yeah.
And I think with any big business, you've got to think about, well, what element of our capital portfolio should be at any point invested in change and innovation versus what should be in maintaining and prosecuting what we've already got that works really well. And I guess my perspective is, as head of innovation, I want to put probably a lot more in that first camp than someone who's maybe running one of our big divisions who would rather keep it in the second camp. As a senior leader of the business beyond my role, I think part of my reflection is I need to balance the needs of the total business, not just my personal prosecution of innovation projects.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. Okay, so just very, very quickly, there's a few sort of single words that I'm just going to throw at you and expect to get a single word back, which I do to try and bring together a bit of a word cloud at the end of each series.
Okay.
What word comes to mind when I say to you PropTech?
Noise.
What about innovation?
Change.
Leadership.
Vision.
ESG.
Opportunity.
I'm pleased you said that. So many people have those sort of buzzwords of what we're seeing at the minute, which is essential, and it is. But I actually think what I've seen with Cushman, which is unique to everybody else, is everybody else looks at the pledges and they're not looking at the social and the governance. And actually, what I really liked about what Cushman have done with it is they've actually as much focus on the S and the G as they have the E, and it's rare because it's an opportunity. It's not just about sustainability. This is about company-wide attitude to aren't just the environment, right?
Completely, yeah.
That's my high horse. Customer.
Raison d'etre. That's not a word, is it? That's a phrase. I cheated there. That to your kind of previous answer, that would be the everything or essential thing. That's what our entire focus is. Our customers.
And that's because of the style of business Cushman is, right?
Yeah. We're an advisory business. We exist to service our clients. That's got to be our focus.
So, on the very nature, then, competitor.
Irrelevant. Optimistically irrelevant. If you've got a good path, you shouldn't worry about what everyone else is doing. But maybe that's a little bit aspirational.
Data.
Value.
Strategy.
Alignment.
And last one for you, culture.
Sorry, say that again, James. Sorry.
Culture.
I'd use the word I used before, which is glue.
Yeah, I thought. Do you know what? I was looking along saying glue to bind the organisation together and how to make a difference. So I had a feeling that glue would be the one that you picked out on that. Cool. That's interesting. Right. So another sort of a bit of advice one really here. I asked this of everybody, and it seems to be quite popular. If you were to recommend a book to another fellow leader, innovation, probably technology-wise, or just a general leader, what would you recommend and why?
Right, I'm going to cheat again slightly, so sorry. There are two books that have genuinely changed my life in a really positive way. There's lots of books I've read that are interesting, but there's two books that have genuinely changed my life. One of them was How to Quit Smoking by Alan Carr, which is probably the most important book I've ever read because for obvious reasons. But that I appreciate might be a narrower subset of your listenership that might benefit from that.
You know, I mean, Alan Carr. I mean, of all people, make it fun.
It's a different one. It's a namesake. But the other book that I think is incredibly relevant for people in an innovation or change role is a book by Spencer Johnson called Who Moved My Cheese. I don't know if you've read that one, James. It's basically, for those who are listening who haven't read it, it's basically a story about four mice who are in a maze looking for cheese, and then somebody moves their cheese, basically. And if that's not quite selling it to you, it's a sort of allegory that explores how people react to change. And it gives you some mechanisms for helping deal with personal change, and it concludes that change is a good thing, not to be feared. But I think in combination with that and the quit smoking book, I think there's commonality to those, which is they're about reframing the way your mind is conditioned to perceive things. So people, when I was a smoker, I would have an internal rhetoric that said I enjoy smoking, and I think many people in a business that's undergoing, the dynamic business undergoing change, people's natural internal rhetoric is change is a bad thing to be feared. It's going to disenfranchise me in some way. And that is a really self-limiting view on change that I think I would fully endorse that people who feel that way read this and then come back and see if your perspective is changed afterwards, because it really frames change as an opportunity for everyone. I'm not a big reader, to be honest. I don't read a lot any more books, but having said that, I do probably read 3 hours a day of academic papers, of articles, of data. I'm an avid reader. I just don't read books very often, but I hope those two were helpful to someone.
No, they are. I mean, and actually, that series of books around sort of Who Moved My Cheese and all the other ones in that sort of series are brilliant, because they're just sort of, you can pick them up and put them down, and they're really quick. You can read them in half a day, so they're sort of perfect. Really. Okay, really interesting insights on that one. What I'd really like to do is just focus on a couple of sort of Cushman focused discussions, and I'd like to sort of try and enable you to bring in things like the Future of Cities Lab and the program that you set up, and all of that lot, because I think it feeds into this one question about creating an innovative culture. So what I'd really like to do, I mean, we've talked about sort of describing innovation at Cushman and the organisation more broadly, but what I'd really like to talk about is this word culture. And we've talked in other edits, people will be able to see that we've talked about culture is about the glue that binds an organisation together. So I'd really like to have a look at this creation of an innovation-based culture amongst the 50,000 plus staff of Cushman. How have you, or you may not have done it yet, how are you going about bringing that into the organisation?
Well, again, I think you've got to be quite humble here as a head of innovation of your ability to actually affect major cultural change in an organisation like ours. But I think the way we're nudging, and I think that's the way that you've got to look at this, is important to what we're doing. Is one of the pillars of what we're doing is around people and innovation, and it starts with empowering people. And I'll give you a couple of examples of that. So in every of our service lines, we're going through a visioning exercise to various stages complete in some of them, about where that service line needs to be in the future. And certainly that discussion is catalysed by people like me offering perspectives on external change. But it's not my view on the future. The service line leadership across our European region need to have that. They need to own that vision. And unless they own it, I don't think it will it'll be affected. So enfranchising people at that kind of who have agency at that kind of level is super important. At a lower level of the organisation, there's a couple of things we're doing. The first is we've set up a citizen development programme globally that allows people to invest their time in creating quick fix solutions, and we train those people. We invest in the training in order to give them the tool sets to effect small scale innovation, and that helps to get pilots off the ground in a way that is less bureaucratic or doesn't need a lot of money behind it or a lot of people ticking a form to say it's okay. It just gives people an opportunity to do that.
Yeah.
But another thing we're doing, so again, we're a big organisation. I keep saying that, which is a huge advantage to us, right? I mean, it means we can invest in the platform, it means we can service clients globally, we can deliver a full suite of services. But it also, for a role like head of innovation, means there's more complexity in the design to manage. And there's huge opportunities in just sharing best practice across groups. So I've set up a number of best practice groups across the organisation that team up to kind of share that knowledge and be able to kind of one-up each other. I think, look, also you mentioned our Future of Cities Lab. Thanks for the plug. This is a campaign I'm really personally passionate about that we started a few weeks ago, actually a couple of weeks ago, which explores how cities might change to a horizon of 2040. And I think this is quite a difficult topic, right? Because no one really knows what the future involves in 2040. It'd be quite difficult. It's quite difficult to project that far.
Yeah.
And in order to make some educated reasoning why things are going to be like that way in the future, you've got to risk being wrong. And I think in many big organizations, there's not a cultural acceptance of being wrong. And in one of the ambitions of that project, what we're trying to do is to try and frame a series of parameters about the future and a logical discussion about them, but I acknowledge some of the failings and some reasons where they might go wrong and push the boundaries. We've also been hugely innovative, I would like to say, in terms of the design and way that website and portal works. We've set it up as essentially a virtual environment, and it's just a very different way to consume content than the real estate services industry is used to using.
I just frame that a little bit, because I think it's really interesting the way that you've almost provided a narrative there to feed into the explanation of what the lab is. So is it there to say, we're probably going to be wrong? And I picked this up for those of you who are not a subscriber to Richard's Future Cut email newsletter, read it, because in the latest one, I think it's your 200th edition, you basically said, I'm going to make some predictions and they're going to be wrong. Is that because you see part of your role to help staff realise that it is okay to be wrong, but you have to be forward-thinking, you have to look and make predictions? And is that part of what the lab is there to do, which is to provide that framework of acceptability about not always getting it right?
Yeah. I mean, it's certainly a vehicle to give effect to that principle. I think, if you look back at the property services industry, how it's operated historically, it's tended to be quite conservative, quite traditional, quite straight, seen as a professional advisor, someone who's going to execute and kind of follow steps to get to the end of a process. I did a lot of work with our clients over the last sort of 3 years and asked them, because being focused on what your clients want is quite important to innovation, right? So I asked them what they're looking for from an advisor like us, and they were very consistent in their answers. And one of the things that was perhaps not expected by some of my colleagues in this was the importance of creativity in the role that we have. And in order to be creative, you've got to be willing to put your neck on the block and willing to be wrong. Now, I think that doesn't mean you have a free pass to using guesswork in how you construct answers about the future. I think you've got to be very logical about your approach. But equally, I think when you're looking out to a horizon of what might change by 2040, you've got to acknowledge the probabilities and take a more stochastic approach to projection. And my firm advocacy to my colleagues within our business is be willing to be wrong, but challenge what we've got today in a way that might give our clients ideas and perspectives that they didn't have previously. And some of those might be useful to them, and some of them might not be, and they can discard them. But I think not taking chances, not taking risks it's the biggest enemy of any business, candidly. And I think you've got to be willing to break new ground, and that is a very common factor to innovation, obviously.
I agree. And I was looking away from the camera for a minute onto my computer, actually, because while we were talking, what I just wanted to do was show two things in some of the research that I put together before this interview with Richard, because I think they're really important when we're talking about culture, and a lot of it, and to use your terms again, Richard, is to express values and make sure people are okay with them. I'm just going to flip here, because one of the things I really liked about your tech team, I suppose, was being very clear about the global tech strategy that was there. And again, going back to what we talked about earlier, and we'd be in some of the other edits, is talking about there's a global technology team, there's a global transformation team. But I think understanding values is really important. And pick up these 4 points here about tech strategy. So optimize our day-to-day operations through a robust technology infrastructure. I really like that when you mentioned about, you've developed that development program for small-scale innovations, because ultimately innovation is not about radical thinking a lot of the time. I mean, about 70% of our time should be spent on improving incremental innovation, with only sort of 20 and 10% actually spread around thinking about and actioning radical. So, this is a really important point, I think. Innovate in everything that we do. That is a perfect mentality to, really bring in innovation everywhere throughout an organization. Become trusted advisors. Obviously, you already mentioned about that. Is you're listening to all of the people that you want to try and help, and ultimately, this whole point about investing in strategic collaborations, and that's why what I've seen with Cushman in terms of working with Stanford or 1871 organization, or the plug and play stuff, Metaplot, Fifth Wall, is all going to be important. But to go back, you mentioned about Future Labs. I was having a play around with it earlier on. If you want to have a look at futures, Cushman Wakefield.co.uk, stuff like this is really going to be particularly interesting for some of you guys. And I couldn't, in the speed of things, Richard, jump into the interactive immersive, which I was playing with yesterday. I just couldn't find it, but go and play. There's some pretty cool stuff in there. Right, so let's. I'm just very conscious of time, and I know you've got a sort of a hard stop. So I'm almost really. I think I'm going to attempt just to ask you one very quick one, which was actually something that came up beforehand, and it was a question put to me after my first series, that they would love to hear about these heads of innovation and whether this had that imposter syndrome. And I'd never really thought about it before, so I'm just interested in your take. You've been there for years, Cushman, and you're in this really high important role. Is this a thing for you, or not, or where are you?
I want to say no. Look, I've always I've always been passionate about innovation. I'm really firmly convinced that the plan we've got is a really good one. And I back myself personally, candidly. So in that regard, no. Maybe caveat ... I think some people maybe do have a vision in their mind about what a head of innovation is and what their background is and what they do day to day. And I'm not necessarily sure I match up to that stereotype. And maybe that's because there is no one head of innovation typology. I think. In fact, I was looking at something similar not long ago, and I found 12 different headline specifications for what a head of innovation does, and they're all wildly different. Some are like process optimization, some are futurologists, some are business partner, portfolio owner. Look, in a business like ours, I think it's a little bit less around rolling up your sleeves and sketching on a whiteboard like people might have in their. If you Googled a kind of JPEG of what, head of innovation, that would be sort of what you'd see. And it's more about delivering strategic growth and alignment and creating the conditions for others to succeed. So I would hope that in the future, people will judge me about whether I've done that or not. And I'm absolutely confident that I will have done it. And therefore, I will say, no, I am not suffering from imposter syndrome. Is that clear enough?
It's going to be so much more fun.
Yeah.
All right, we'll finish on that one. And I'm just very, very conscious of Richard's time. So, Richard, I'm just going to end the stream. So stay where you are for a second. For those of you who've watched this, kind of watched the whole thing, thanks for joining us. I hope it's been really insightful. And really, I do encourage you to have a little look around what Cushman are doing, because as a global operation, that they're really pulling the things together well, and certainly you're one of those forward-thinking people as well. So really worth looking. Thanks to my partners in Equiem, Oxford University Save Business School, and Unissu for making this happen. And I will see you for episode 9 next week. Thanks everyone.